Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining the GA4 and TapClicks customer office hours. My name is Angela Hicks, and I'm the Director of Education and Training at TapClicks. And I'm joined today by Brian Butler, who is the CEO and co-founder of SmartTech. Hi, Brian.
Hello, welcome. How's it going, everyone?
I'm so glad that Brian's here. Brian is an outstanding partner of TapClicks. But Brian, tell us a little bit about your background. I know you know a lot about GA4, which is why you're here today.
Yep. Yeah, so I'm a digital marketer that has been in the trenches since about 2008. So about 15 years, going on 16 years almost. And we are, I mean, my history specializes really in paid media. So you're looking at Google, Facebook, Tag Manager, Google Analytics, Search Console, all the kind of basic things that you really need to maximize your efficiency of that. And what's interesting is I found my history, I always kind of leaned towards more of the technical stuff that a lot of people hated to do. It was really kind of the bane of their existence. I always got a lot of enjoyment out of it. So things like tag manager implementations, things like figuring out how to get someone's, e-commerce tracking, figuring out how to solve different problems for clients. And through that, I kind of developed a bit of a niche where really working in software, working in kind of problem solving and helping clients to understand how to solve complex problems. I mean, as an example, my company SmartTech is a channel partner, and we specialize in managing, updating, and building data feeds, which is one of the most boring things most people could ever do, but we get a kick out of it. So it's one of those things where it's just a specialty in kind of the nuance, right? Where you don't necessarily love GA4, but you love what it can do for you. And if you don't understand what it can do for you, you can't leverage it. And so that's kind of the baseline, right? So with the TapClicks partnership, I've been, leveraging and kind of dominating the TapClicks instances and really kind of maximizing every effort I could with the system for a good 6 years now. And through that, have become pretty well vetted as a trainer, as an onboarding specialist, and then even, working with other clients who maybe want to get TapClicks, but, it's been kind of out of reach for a while. We kind of help, clients to make that more attainable. We are a certified partner with TapClicks, and we're actually the exclusive certified partner for the small to medium-sized businesses in the US. We're the only exclusive partner in that market. So it's really exciting to kind of work with you guys in that space and kind of have that levity to kind of work with y'all.
Brian, thank you for sharing your career with us. There have been a lot of questions about GA4 and
Yep.
GA4 with TapClicks. So we wanted to have this office hours, and you're a great person to help us address some customer questions that are out there about GA4. Now,
There's been
GA4 is
some
a
good ones.
yeah, GA4 has only been around for a couple of months now, so I think we're all still learning things. But let me show you what we're going to talk about today. So, our themes for today. First, we're going to start off by discussing the differences between Universal Analytics and GA4, really what you need to know, what's changed, and then tips for after migration. So, once you have set up GA4, some helpful tips there. Then we'll talk about data in GA4, and we will wrap up with more TapClick specific things. We have a GA4 template, so we'll talk through some tips in using that, as well as just blending data as you make this transition from Universal Analytics to GA4. So that said, thank you to everyone that submitted questions before joining today. But if you have questions, please let us know. This is an office hour, so I hope that you participate by asking questions when you have them. So, Brian, let's get into it now. Google Analytics previously was referred to as Universal Analytics, and now we
Yep.
have GA4. Could you tell us a little bit, just at a high level, what's different?
Well, that's a big question. It's a full redo of Google Analytics. A lot of people, when they saw GA4 coming out, they thought it was just kind of a reskin, or they thought it was just a compliance update. But it's a lot more than that. And I think that's a big indicator for everybody who's starting to use this, is that it isn't your same old Google Analytics script. Everything has changed, from how you install the code, to what data layer variables you have to look at, to all the different details that Google's looking at to understand the user journey, to how it even counts sessions. I would say some of the biggest changes that you can find, and we do have a actually a blog that I wrote that I'll put in the I'll put in the questionnaire or in the chat room so you guys can get an idea of what this looks like. I have a couple of different blogs on our page here. Let me see if I can chat this in. Chat. There we go. I'll send it to everybody. So if you guys want to take a look at some more of the details, I've written a couple blogs about this topic, and you can see that on our website. So please feel free to check it out. But the biggest differences that I would say are going to be around how Google now looks at the user and what it defines as a user. So the biggest difference would be like the switch, for example, to user events compared to sessions. So an example of that is that sessions typically only fire by default with a 30-minute time frame. So if you come to the site, you leave, and then 30 minutes later, you leave the site, that session then expires. And then if you come back, later on that day, Google sees that as a brand new session. And so oftentimes sessions could be the same user, just coming back to multiple elements, right? Whereas GA4 is specifically event centric. So they've kind of abandoned the idea of having a user session that's a 30-minute long element. What they're doing now is they're looking at the actual user that's coming in, and they're based that user on different events that they take. So an event could be going to the page, and then going to a button, and then going to a blog, and then going to a white paper download, and then going and downloading a piece of content, and then going to a thank you page, right? All those are different events within that query. And how Google looks at that now is they look at that event and they try to understand that user journey, and they try to be more granular in what the overall user behavior is. And instead of looking at like average time on site, which is a session-based metric, they're looking at average engagement time or automatic session tracking through engagement times. So it really looks at those bigger differences to understand what it is this user is doing. The other thing that's really important is compliance. Google is going to be getting rid of a lot of old data that they have in GA3. And the reason why is because there's a lot of things that have to do with GDPR, where it makes it very challenging for that data to necessarily be 100% secure when it comes to PII. We've had situations with schools a lot of times where someone fills out like a form where they're trying to build in a admissions form, and all of a sudden inside Google Analytics, you're starting to see query strings that have user information in them. And those are very bad. You do not want to have those in there. So that's when you have to go back to your client and say, hey, you got to purge this because it's causing a lot of PII issues. Those are the kind of things that Google Analytics is trying to avoid. It's trying to make sure that it doesn't have just stacks and stacks and stacks and servers upon servers of data that are potentially violating compliance with GDPR. And so what they're doing essentially is saying, listen, we're gonna store all this data if you're willing to pay for GA360, which is about $12,000 a year. And they'll use their storage, and they'll just parse that information, and they're going to be looking through that data to make it better. But GAUA is a free tool. And what they've done is they basically said, if you're going to be using our free tool, we're not going to be providing 90 years of data that you have the ability to look back through. So they're basically culling that information starting, we think it's going to be around October. Google has already shown to be a little bit delayed in their activities. Google Analytics is still showing data for GA3. They're still capturing sessions for a lot of our clients. And they have not cut them off quite yet. So what Google said about June or July is still, we're into September and we're still seeing data. So, their delay and their lag on cutting some of that data, it seems to be a little bit pushed back a little bit, but we do expect them to start calling that information and starting getting rid of all that servers of years of data that they've collected over the time. The other big thing is making sure you're understanding how your information is being seen and how your Google Analytics is tracking those data points. A lot of times the Google Analytics is looking at that user, it's looking at that session, but it is limited to the compliance based on GDPR if someone actually is accepting those cookies. So if you go to someone's site and they don't accept your cookie prompt, that means Google Tag Manager doesn't load, that means your HubSpot tracking doesn't load. That means your Google Analytics doesn't load. Does not give it the compliance to do that. So there is going to be a situation with GA4 where you have to be ready and willing to understand that there's not a one-to-one as far as measurement compatibility. And that's just the nature of how GDPR has changed the way that we do business, as well as Apple and iOS updates that have come along the line. And the new ones coming down for iOS 17 are going to be even more restrictive. So it is an element that is very challenging, and we all have to kind of understand the risks and the rewards that come with this new system.
Great. So, Brian, it sounds like the name is the same, right? Google Analytics, we're still using Google Analytics, but just
Yep,
fundamentally, the way in which we are tracking events now has really changed what
it
kind
has.
of data we see across multiple platforms, right? I think with Google Analytics 4, it sounds like, yes, privacy, but also just having a better ability to track the user across multiple devices.
Yep.
Certainly 10 years ago, right, we didn't all have many devices in which we were browsing content and making purchases, but that is absolutely the reality today. So
Upwards of
thank,
7 devices at a time. I
oh
mean, it's
wow.
crazy how many devices people are using at any given time if you consider TVs as an over-the-top television source. And to your point, we usually refer to this as Google Analytics versus GA4 versus GA3 is not an apple and an orange. It's an apple and an apple, but instead of having a Gala apple, this is a Honeycrisp, right? It still is similar in the DNA, but it's very different in the texture. It's very different in the flavor, and it's very different in the price, right? It's not the same product, so you have to think about it differently, especially when you're trying to tell people what these sessions are, what these metrics are, and you're trying to explain to your client how these have changed, because it is a very different model.
Brian, thank you. Before we talk about some tips about after you've migrated to GA4, I just want to pause here and see if there are any questions. If you have a question, feel free to hit the Q&A and we will read those and do our best to answer them.
It's like we got some analysis paralysis. It's all right. There's a lot. There's a lot to understand.
I know it takes effort to type too. I know it takes a moment. So you might have it in your head typing it out. Um, Well, Brian, how about we talk a little bit about migration? So I know that you have
Sure.
helped many of your clients, get set up on GA4, and a lot of those clients also happen to use TapClicks. So can you share what you've learned about this shift over to GA4?
Sure. I said the biggest thing about migration to recognize is that obviously sessions are still tracking in GA3. So you may feel like it's not important and that maybe Google is just spoofing us and, oh no, we're not going to actually change. But it is happening on different accounts. We are seeing some accounts, not all. It's very limited so far, where Google is stopping the procurement of data in GA3. So one, I will say, don't get too comfortable with the fact that GA3 is still somewhat hanging around. It's only a matter of time before that data stops collecting data. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I would recommend going through the migration progress in the actual settings and recognize what needs to be updated. One of the biggest things you can do is make sure your users are being migrated over to GA4, make sure that your audiences are being migrated, and make sure that your overall data that you're doing, like for example, we have a lot of updates with referral exclusions. You have referral exclusions in your GA3 for a reason. You want to make sure those are transferred over to GA4. A lot of people don't realize it's even possible. So you definitely want to be mindful of that. The other thing is making sure that you are using any kind of custom dimensions that you're doing, kind of rebuilding those over there. The challenges I would say is that GA4 doesn't have a certain amount of features. So like, for example, if you have audiences built in GA4 that are built on different data as far as like segmentation of user demographics, or it's third-party data. We work with a lot of ABM. We are a partner of Rollworks. And a lot of times when those platforms are integrated with Google Analytics, it creates custom dimensions. Those custom dimensions are great because you can see that Microsoft came into your website and they spent 6 minutes on a page. But you need to make sure those dimensions are set up in GA4 as well so that you're not losing that valuable data. The other thing with migration is making sure the audience tool, there's a Google Sheet that you can use that allows you to go in, pull in your audience data, and migrate that into your GA4. As we mentioned, you're not going to see every single audience in there, but you will see a fair amount of them. So it's worth the effort to go in there and make that migration and build that data in. The other thing to recognize is that Google Analytics GA3 versus GA4, GA3 had a great custom calculation field where you could create a custom calculation. So if you want to see a cost per goal event, right? And you want to see the cost of your advertising divided by a specific goal. Well, that was available to you in GA3, but it is not available to you in GA4. GA4 has not migrated custom calculations in there, which is, kind of challenging on that. And I would say that one of the best things about TapClicks is you get the ability. There are other visuals we have coming up. Yeah, that there is definitely some other visuals. You do have the benefit really of optimizing your system where you can use TapClicks to create custom calculations. You can use TapClicks to create custom fields, and you can use TapClicks to migrate that data to create a lot of really cool reports. And to the lady's question, we're actually going to be doing a demo here in a moment as well, showing some different functions as far as the TapClicks reporting, how to build those in. So it's not just me talking the entire time, just as a measure of context there. But yeah, there's a lot of really great things for your migration that you can take from your GA3 and build into Google, into TapClicks, so that you don't have to worry about it. The last thing I'll say is that the big thing about migration is that a lot of people are coming to the question of, hey, I have all this years of data in GA. What do I do with that? Well, the standard protocol that Google's recommending is BigQuery. However, TapClicks has built a connection that kind of makes BigQuery relevant if you're a TapClicks client. So what happens is we actually pull the last 5 to 8 years worth of data from your Google Analytics GA3 into our data warehouse and store that data in our data lake. And then we make that data available to you in your reporting. So if you need to look at GA3 data for the last 5 years, look year over year and understand trend analysis, you can do that without having to become an expert in BigQuery. Really, really super valuable. And then in the end, if you guys ever, chose to cancel your TapClicks membership, you can do a data export from your TapClicks data lake into BigQuery so that you can have that data still retained. But it gives you the ability to not have to rely on BigQuery, which is a really important and challenging thing to do. Most people don't understand how BigQuery works, and it's a really, really big barrier to entry when it comes to that storage of data. And TapClicks has handled a lot of that for us, which is amazing.
Thank you, Brian. Since you mentioned data, let's talk a little bit about what kinds of dimensions and metrics you can get into TapClicks from GA4. So
Sure.
what I will do is we actually have a website page here, and I will put this in the chat if everyone would like to take a look along with me. So just on tapclicks.com, we have a whole slew of information regarding all of the dimensions and metrics that are available. Now, data views that's simply how we organize these metrics. And Brian, I know that you recommend this page a lot to your
We do.
clients as well. So what you'll see on this page, you'll notice in the middle here, we have 2 tabs for stored and on-demand data. So stored, as it sounds, once we have this connection, we pull in the data and we store it. Something I'll say about TapClicks is that we do store that in perpetuity. Brian, I think Google operates a little bit differently with how long they store your data. Do you have any talking points on that?
For BigQuery,
Yeah,
I think the difference is you have to kind of pay for the data that you're bringing into BigQuery, but I don't know that there's necessarily a date range where it stops it. I
gotcha.
think as long as you're paying them to store the data, they're going to store it. But
They'll store
it
it.
is a cost, and it becomes quite expensive quite quickly.
Yeah. And then on demand, we actually, in your reporting, so if you have a widget that uses an on demand connector, you'll also see Data Cloud. We'll take a look at this in the platform in a little bit, but
Yep.
this is actually being pulled on demand when that page loads. And something that I want to point out here, the reason why we have 2 tabs, even if we look in specific data views, and you can scroll here, there are actually different metrics inside of each of these. So, Brian, I think when we get into the platform, maybe you can walk us through a little bit of the differences and maybe when to
Absolutely.
use which. Yeah. So just wanted to share this page. Brian, do you have anything else that you'd like to add about this connectors page that we have up.
Yeah, I think the bit that I would say on this is that TapClicks has done a really good job of being ahead of the curve when it comes to data and bringing in the API. But I want to provide a little bit of caution just from clients who are trying to use it and maybe getting frustrated because they see certain metrics aren't available immediately in the system. Please recognize that there is a mountain of data available to you. It's huge. It's a really, really big data set. And if we were to load every single metric for you into your instance when this first thing came about, your instance would load so slowly that you would be very frustrated about the load speed and load time. Think about it like a toolbox. If you load up, the first two, runs of your toolbox, it's light enough to where you can move your toolbox around your garage and have a little bit more pliability and more mobility. But if you load every single drawer in that toolbox up with every single, tool that you ever need, it's going to be a mountain of heaviness, right? You're not going to be able to move it. So we want to make sure we're balancing speed versus efficiency. So when you're looking at the data that you see in the connectors website, recognize that some of these data points are going to be available to you immediately. It is kind of your, best practices. But other points are going to be available to you only really if you need it. The stored data, if you need data that isn't accessible to you immediately, talk to your customer service manager and they will help you to turn on data views that you may not realize you don't have. It's part of the hidden data view kind of functionality where you see all these different data views that have bundles of different metrics bundled together. Whereas on demand has those metrics available to you pretty much on demand. But when you load it up in the system, it does take a little while longer to load because it's pulling an immediate query to the API and registering that data back to you. So it isn't as quick. On-demand data doesn't look back quite as far. It's limited to 14 months, like for example, for Google Analytics or whatever the standard look back window is for the platform of choice. But for stored data, you have the benefit of looking back really, really long time. You can look back, 5 years if you need to, depending on what data you have stored and what data you imported into smart connectors. But with on-demand, you get data from today. Whereas stored data, you don't get data from today, at least not consistently. So there's benefits and pros and cons between using stored and on-demand data, just depending on what your overall needs are.
Yeah, and Brian, I just kind of want to circle back to the beginning. You explained how GA4 is really calculating these metrics in a very different way rather than focusing on sessions. So I just wanted to point out here that these data views that we have, the ways in which we've organized these metrics is really what we would consider a best practice. So when you reach out to your CSM, they might be able to guide you, if you're trying to match up some metrics that don't really jive, they will let you know about that.
Absolutely. And while you're on the screen, can you mouse over the top all dimensions so that people can see how to easily see which data view certain fields are in? Because that's probably one of the coolest functions about this page.
Yes, so I'm over analytics account ID. Uh,
Yep.
this is a great little cheat. So you can see it gets small, but you can see exactly which data views are in here. And then you can use Control F or Command F if you're on a Mac to actually search for something. So I see audience ID here. If I just do a find on the page, it's going to highlight audience throughout the page for me.
Really handy. And one of the benefits of doing the mousing over the metric and having that little pop-up come up is that if you were to just do Control F, you'd have to open up all the different boxes to see where it was. But if you mouse over the metric, you can quickly see what the data is and which metric it is in. We definitely can share the recording. I do believe that's the case.
Yeah, yeah. So we will share the recording afterwards. We're going to send out an email. We'll also have it on our YouTube channel.
Yep. So that's one of the cool things about this function is really using it to understand where you're going to find that data because it's super valuable.
Great. Brian, I would love to actually get into TapClicks now and
Let's do it.
talk a little bit about what we can do with TapClicks and GA4.
Absolutely. Let me go ahead and share my screen. I'll take over on that. And we had a couple of questions about the attribution in the customer journey. Do we want to cover those before the instance, or do you want to cover the instance first? What's your preference?
Let's start with the questions about GA4 and the user journey and
Okay.
conversions. Yep.
I will go ahead and show those then. So we had some really, really good questions come up this round. Session questions I have not actually had yet, which is really, really great to see because we're getting some more complicated, more in-depth questions, which I love. And this one challenged me a little bit, not gonna lie. So what I wanted to showcase is two things that people have asked that have been just like really good questions. So the first thing I'm gonna get into is attribution settings. So this is a really, really important feature of how Google Analytics has changed. So the default attribution setting for Google Analytics is data-driven attribution. Data-driven attribution takes a look at your journey, your user journey, and it tries to give proper credit to each data source that was influential within the buying decision. Now, why this is important is that a lot of times using last click, you get to a situation where you have a user who goes in, looks at 5 different keywords, and then finally decides to buy on a branded term. Well, if you only look at last click, you're going to overvalue your branded term and you're going to devalue the 5 different keywords that person used to make it to the branded keyword. Because really, branded keywords are going to be the last bit, the last point of entry for almost any account, whether it's direct, organic, or whether it's paid. Branded click is going to be kind of the final decision-making point, unless you're dealing with a very, very high impulse buy product. So how I would describe this is data-driven attribution gives proper credit in situations where certain keywords would be devalued, and maybe you would actually pause keywords that were doing really, really good things for you. But because you didn't have data-driven attribution, you didn't understand that those keywords were playing a key role. Data-driven attribution is the new default for GA4. GA3 had a last non-direct click attribution model. So the difference here is really, really important. If you click on a Google ad, and then within 7 days, you come back and you click on, say, an organic or say a email, Google Analytics is going to give credit to the last non-direct click, which means not direct, what the last source was in a 7-day average window for a look back. So if your paid media campaign was, bringing that in, but they clicked on email, but to get to the final page, email is going to get credit. Whereas with data-driven attribution with the GA4, it's going to look at that window and say, all right, 7 days, paid media, email, close. Boom. 50% to paid, 50% to email. Those are the attribution models. Those are the who gave us a credit. And I can tell you, when we started using GA4 as our source of truth, we ended up getting a 30% lift in overall tracked conversions for GA3 versus GA4 because we were actually getting proper credit based on what we were bringing to the table. And this was a really big, data, game changer for us because we were able to understand quickly how that detail looks. The second thing I'll explain about this, which I don't feel like a lot of people necessarily realize, is that Google Analytics, even still, is going to look at your conversion based on the date of conversion, whereas Google Ads looks at your conversion based on the date of click. So if you're trying to do a one-to-one comparison between Google and GA and Google GA, if you look at your sale that happened today and you look in Google Analytics or ads, you may say, hey, the sale is not showing. I don't understand. Why isn't it showing? Well, it's because Google Ads is giving credit to the date it clicked, which could have been 60 days ago. It could have been 90 days ago, depending on what your look back window is. So you have to recognize that if that user's been on your site for a while, Google Ads is going to give credit to that initial click, not the date of conversion. And Google Analytics is going to prioritize the date of conversion. So very, very different models, and it's important to recognize the difference. As you're looking at our attribution page here, to get to this, you need to go to your admin settings towards the bottom. And then under admin, you're going to get into your property. And then under your property, you're going to get into your attribution settings here towards the bottom. And this is where you can understand, do you want to have a data-driven attribution, which is recommended? Do you want to revert back to last click, first click, linear, or time decay? And I will say that Google Paid is getting to the point where they're going to be deprecating a lot of these linear models, and they're going to be focused aggressively on data-driven here in the very near future. So be mindful of that as well. Channels that can receive credit, Google Ads credit, only Google Ads are eligible to receive conversion credit, or paid and organic. So you can really kind of determine what you want to have in here as an attribution model. And then you can also look at your conversion window. Are you giving acquisition credit to your first 7 days or 30 days? Are you having other events be tracked over 30, 60, or 90 days? And then what's your view through engagement rate, which is currently fixed at a 3-day? So this is really important for you to understand because it makes a big difference into how the attribution and credit is being given to your Google Ads account.
So,
The other,
Brian, I
please.
just wanted to ask, it looks like Google recommends the data-driven attribution model, but they do offer others. I'm curious if you set up all of your clients the same way. I bet you have more than one client using GA4. Do you set
Yep.
them all up the same for ease of your, keeping it all straight? Or do you really have a need to kind of change up the attribution model or the channels that receive credit based on the client?
So it really depends on the client needs. I mean, we're going to recommend data driven because we want to understand the full scope and understand the full value. But there's a lot of clients that we work with. We have a lot of clients that are in the enterprise paid space. So, they're spending $1 million a month. And depending on who we're working with, there can be some very sophisticated directors of marketing that we work with that have developed kind of how they look at things. And so I would say that, if you're dealing with someone who necessarily isn't picky or doesn't understand maybe the full impact of their decisions, you may end up having a more junior level representative that you're working with your client that just says, I don't really understand this stuff. Then in that situation, I'm just going to put data driven because it's the most recommended. It's the default standard. But if I have a client like we had one of the big yoga companies that's in the market, they're the biggest yoga name in the market. They would not approve a data-driven model because they didn't want to look at the last click. They wanted to look at the first click. And their entire model was built around optimizing for what keywords built interest from the very start. And they wanted to maximize the visibility on those keywords that they found to be kind of the seed terms that built their initial engagement. So client needs are going to dictate what you do, but I would say as a standard definition, data-driven is going to be what you're going to probably lean towards. It's going to be most of the time your default, just like it is Google's.
Great. Brian, I also, just while we're in Google Analytics here, we had a question about user journeys. So
You
those
did.
were easy to find in UA, but in GA4, we had a question of where did those user journeys go?
It's a great question, honestly. And so the answer is that it's supposed to be easy to find, but I have found that it's actually hidden in the library. So as an example of what I mean by that, so if you go into your campaign and you go down into your reports, and then into your reports, you have your life cycle, you have your user. So it is supposed to be under user, and it is supposed to be one of these breadcrumbs here, like user attributes or tech. But by default, or just how the settings are set up, it is not showing in here. So how do you fix this? So this is probably the most valuable tip of this entire training. So take notes. Down in the library, you're going to find a plethora of different data points that you can actually bring in that you may not have ever realized was here. Including Search Console data, right? Including your lifecycle data. So if you come over to the side, and I have a microphone blocking my view, you have user data here, which is your user, let's call it a collection. Edit your collection, and then in here, you're going to see there's a lot of other reports that you have available to you that you probably never realized, and you probably were like, oh, I've been missing that. So your Google Analytics e-commerce purchases, you can bring over and you can populate into a new topic. So in this case, I'm actually going to populate it under tech. Yeah, let's go ahead and put it under tech. And then under, for example, Google organic searches, you can populate that in here as well. I'll actually put that under users. And then the question about user journey, you have user purchase journey right here. And this is where you can bring this in and sort this up under the user metric here. And there's other overview reports that you can look at too. So you have drive online sales, engagement overview, monetization, generate leads overview, retention overview, and then your user attributes overview. So there's a lot you can bring in that really allow you to visualize a lot of these details. There we go, monetization overview. So now I'm going to hit save. And what you're going to notice is that now that I've gone into the library and I've added some of these new user specific metrics, when I come back into here, you're going to see under user attributes and tech, you're going to see those new fields that I put in here. So for example, our e-commerce purchases, you're going to see the details populate there. for user acquisition or user journey, you're going to see them populate in here. Let me see if the user journey saved. User journey did not save. Let's confirm that real quick here. User journey. There it is. User journey, save. There we go. And we'll go back. There we go. User purchase journey. So now this is where you can actually access that user purchase journey. So you can start understanding whether they're going to different products, they're making it to the add to cart, they're making it to the checkout, or purchasing. And my site's not e-commerce, so obviously I don't have any kind of e-commerce metrics in here, but you can kind of get an idea of what you're seeing here and what the abandonment rate is. So this is how you access that, as well as how you access a lot of really important metrics that you may not have realized were available to you, but are actually fairly quickly accessible. So pretty exciting when it comes to what you can bring into here and all the different updates you can bring into. Obviously, I don't have e-commerce, so that didn't make sense, but you can get a really clean idea as far as what all the details are you can pull in.
Thank you, Brian. So, once you get everything set up in GA4, you're probably using less and less time working in Google Analytics and more time working in TapClicks and pulling that information in. So why don't we talk a little bit about the GA4 template that TapClicks has built?
Absolutely. So the GA4 template is available to you. So if you go to add section, under here, you're going to see GA overview. It is important to note that this widget, when it was first released, had a bug and was updated. So if you have added this a while back and you haven't used it in a while, it's worth noting that you should probably delete that section and just repopulate it with this new widget. And the reason is just you want to make sure the data is all showing it accurately, and you want to make sure all the data views are mapped that map into that detail. Let's see here. So you can click on that. So the first thing you'll notice when you come in here is you do have a bit of a guide at the top. You'll probably want to get rid of this before you start publishing this to clients, just because this is really more of an internal dialogue. You can update this data. The second thing you're going to notice is that this is built with the Pro Services team. The Pro Services team is fantastic. They do a great job with data visualization. Lauren over there is an absolute beast. Everything she does always impresses me. And you can see some of the really neat things that they build in here. So one trick that I learned about these is that these headers are actually duplicatable, and you can actually save these in a way where you can customize this for your own brand. So this is pretty much gold right here. So if you go into the header, you're going to see that you can change this to say whatever you want to change it to, right? But you're also going to notice this really cool gradient color scheme. Well, if you go into the colors and you go into the linear gradient, you're going to see the hex codes for whatever the colors are you want to use. For my brand, SmartTech has a 2-color gradient, so it looks really nice when you blend these together. And so on my reports, I make sure to have that same kind of visualization populated here, and you can edit it right in the code. And then once you've edited this, you can actually save this header by going to the publish library and calling this the header. You can call it SmartTech header, you can call it your own header. But once it's been published, make sure to add the description and make sure to add a tag. In this case, I would say header. And then once that's been published, you can actually go back in and access this very, very quickly under a data widget. And then under templates, you're going to see all the different elements here. So if I had saved it under header, which I did not, once I typed in header in here and filtered it, you'd see that header populate. So now that you're building brand new reports, you can have really, really nice graphics for those headers kind of populate, and it's really easy and duplicatable. So that's the first tip I would recommend, for making these as nice as they are. The next thing I would also recommend is being sure that you are setting the GA4 section as so basically when you go into your managed sections, you go to your GA4 down here, and then you're going to see assign a data source. That assigned data source is really valuable because that's going to make it to where this section will show or disappear based on the client and if they have GA4 mapped yet. So if you're using a master report where you have, every single data source mapped in here, if you make sure these are assigned to the data source, it is flexible and dynamic where your client will dictate what is shown. And if they don't have Facebook, it ain't going to show Facebook. If they don't have Tag Manager or Google GA4, it ain't going to show GA4. So it's one of those ways where you can really make this from a one and done report to a template that you can leverage for one to many, and really, really handy. The other thing that I recommend on here is that we have had questions with users who are coming into these standard reports. And when they're looking at the details here, they're seeing things like users, the user acquisition report, when we're looking at like the details here, we have new users, engaged sessions. What we have had come to come to light on a lot of our internal reports is that people are asking questions about some of these metrics because they don't recognize them. And that can be a challenge. The total users, for example, versus active users, if you're looking in Google and you're looking at your GA journey, those are not fields that are in here, at least not accessible to the average user. So a lot of our clients that we're dealing with are saying, I don't understand this report from your GA4 report. I can't make the numbers match up. And it's a sense of familiarity that the client is looking for that is super important. So I actually recommend making a bit of a modification to this. This is how we personalize it. You can obviously personalize it to your own degree, but I actually usually will remove this widget right here. And this one is built off of I think it's an acquisition details data view. For me personally, this first widget up here, I like to ensure that I am using the properties view. So if I go into data category, if I type in Google Analytics, GA4, you're going to notice that you have properties that pops up is the first one. This one actually has some other metrics that are available to you, like sessions, session data, average engagement time. Now, I know you're going to say, but Brian, sessions have changed so much. It's true, they have, but it's one of the things that your client is still very comfortable with. Your client is used to reporting on sessions. Your client is used to seeing sessions as a familiar metric. So I would say it is your responsibility as an agency or as a marketer to explain to your subordinate or to bosses or whoever the difference that sessions are not the same, but you still can track sessions as a point of reference. And if you look at your sessions, you're going to see that sessions and users match up very well, typically. And you're going to see that data populates. Now, sessions is counted different. We all are aware of that now. So you have to be mindful of the fact that sessions are not necessarily the same as they were. It's not a 30-minute opt-out. It's not where someone comes back in and it's going to retrack that person. It's going to track the user more consistently. It's going to track them across different devices. It's going to have better cross-device overall training. And it's something that you need to be mindful of, but it is a very familiar and continuous metric that people want to see. So I typically will come in here, add sessions, engage sessions, sessions per user. These are really valuable metrics that people are still looking at. And if someone's coming into their Google account, they're going to see that these actually match similarly to what they're seeing in their default visualizations inside GA4. And again, it's just a comfort level for clients. So I would definitely recommend making that update. The other thing I would recommend is when you look at your widgets here, Lauren showed me a really amazing function here that I think everyone should recognize. Calling out to Lauren on the Pro Services team. She's amazing. If we look at the settings, you're going to see the border width, border color, corner radius, wrap size, and font size. I would highly recommend taking a screenshot of everything you're seeing here. And the reason why is when you build a new widget by default and you have these metrics populate, this really nice colored line that goes behind your widget profile. Right now, it's a pretty orange. That line is modifiable. It's changeable. And this is how you change it. And you can make it bigger, you can make it thinner. And these settings I feel like are really clean. So if you're going to create a new widget that has sessions and session data and user sessions and trying to recreate what you're seeing inside of Google Analytics GA4, which again are these metrics here that I typically am trying to recreate, this is something where it's not going to have this border and it's going to look where it doesn't match. So when you're doing customization to this, it's really important to recognize the continuity of your colors, your border width, and all those elements. So take a screenshot of this right here and really just dig into what you can do with these designs. I can tell you after 7 years of using this was an update that I had to make, and I had to learn how to work on this. And it's a really great feature to be able to kind of leverage at your disposal, because it makes the reports just look so much better. Anything you want to add to that as far as the product side?
Um, uh, I love the idea of reverse engineering things. I'll also just say, when we took a look at that HTML code, if you have never written HTML, your web designer's busy, don't forget there are AI tools out there. You could ask, like, here's the snippet, how do I change the color? And it will give you some information there. So just
That is
another,
very true.
yeah, another educational tool out there. We don't have to learn how to code. I would also, I noticed at the top here, we do have instructions when you get started with this template. It really is a starting point. There is live call widgets in this template. So I wanted
Yes, there
to
are.
see how we turn those on and off. Again, we looked at the connectors page, we looked at stored versus on demand. On demand is what we're talking about here with live
Yep.
calls.
Yeah, that's actually a great point. So if we look at, again, we're going to pull up Google Analytics. I got a second screen, so I'm like having to look over here. So I apologize if it looks weird. But as you're looking at your metrics, recognizing that live call data widgets, again, you have a lot bigger supply of metrics to you. And live call widgets look at today's data as well as going backwards. But they do not look at historical data as far as going back, like in GA4, it's a 14-month max that you can look back. So again, recognize your limitations, work within them. But if you're looking at what you're trying to populate, you can see that you have the data cloud at the very top here. Data cloud essentially is a live call widget or a stored widget. If it's a use a data cloud, that is the data lake. That is TapClicks' warehouse of data that it is stored for you. And it's going to be looking at this data, pulling this in, and allowing you to look back 5 years and looking at cost comparisons and all sorts of great stuff. If you deselect this, however, it changes the entire module and it moves it into a live call widget. And as you notice, it changes the data category, the data view, it changes everything. So deciding whether you want to do a live call widget or a stored widget up front is going to save you a lot of hassle having to rebuild what you just built as a widget, because it resets all the settings. So now you come back into here again, and you can see that Google Analytics GA4 is available to you. It's going to populate, and then you select your campaign. So whether you're doing a city level data, age level data, audience level data, or campaign, assignment is going to be who is the client or who is the client group that you're going to be pulling this data in from. And you have to remember, this is a live call widget. So it's ignoring your client measurement that you have inside of TapClicks, which is an internal mapping, and it is leveraging your external mapping that you have inside of the platform. So as you can see here, it's TapClicks, marketing site, GA4, and so you can see exactly what this assignment is, but it may look different than the client that you synced on for store data. I'm going to select one of these guys. It'll allow me to choose my different metrics, and the metrics that are available to me, as you can see as I'm scrolling, total users, new users, you have ad cost, you have total ad revenue, total revenue. One thing while I'm looking at this is just a little tip. So this is something new that GA4 does, is GA4 actually tracks Google AdSense revenue and purchase revenue. So if you have a e-commerce site and you also have a blog, and you're using Google AdSense to promote yourself and to promote your recipes using your hot sauce, let's say, that you're selling, and you're then using your blog with advertising on it to make a little extra money. Well, total ad revenue, there's a metric that I just pulled in here, is the ad revenue from Google AdSense, not from Google AdWords. It's a very, very distinct difference, but people are going, well, why isn't this Google ad revenue showing my Google ads? It's not the same metric. Total revenue, purchase revenue is your e-commerce value. So if you're selling hot sauce, that hot sauce is going to be purchased through the total revenue, your total purchase revenue. And if you're selling ads on your blog, that is your total ad revenue. And then you can look at total revenue, which is those two combined. So it is a very, very different metric than how Google GA3 looks at that metric and looks at that data. So be aware of it. But as you're pulling these data filters in, you can actually filter this data inside the widget, not externally, like you had done in your stored widget. So it's a little bit of a different workflow. And one thing that I should mention here is that it is a Actually probably better to do not a metric, but a field here. Let's go campaign. Yeah, I guess that works. So in the live call widget, you can leverage the wildcard functionality. So wildcards, if you haven't used them yet, it's your key on my mouse. It's 8. It's an asterisk. It's asterisk and then the word, asterisk after the word, or asterisk before and after. And it essentially is what you would do to do kind of like a contains all. So when I do asterisk word asterisk as a wildcard, that is essentially me asking the system, what does this contain? If the campaign contains brand, if a campaign contains Facebook, then I would filter that Facebook campaign into my widget. That same functionality is leverageable and usable within the live call widgets. And you can really kind of take advantage of that to make these filters pretty robust. And then I would recommend, as you get in here, you can check out your aggregation, save the widget, and it's going to populate this information at the bottom, like it always does, into a new view. And once you have that information, you can visualize this really however you need. Live call widgets are still able to be used with line charts, with combo charts, with pie grids, with big number widgets. Everything that you typically would use as far as your visualization is still available to you in the live call widgets.
Awesome. Brian, thank you for all of these tips throughout this entire webinar. We have a few more minutes left, so if you have a question, please get that in the next couple of minutes. A question that often comes up is after I've migrated to GA4, right? I have some clients, I've had their Google Analytics data, I've been reporting on that for years. And when I try to do reporting, I'm effectively using a different data source. So I'm wondering if you have a way to kind of provide that continuity, even though, Google Analytics, it's changed very much. The numbers, the names might be the same, the metrics are different. How do you approach that?
So I will say that this is not necessarily best practices. This is out of necessity. So there are situations where clients have come to us and said, hey, I need this. And fortunately, the TapClicks team has actually adopted some different ideas in order to accomplish this. So the challenge that you have with combining data is that GA4 and GA3 have been running together for multiple years now. So if you try to take GA3, GA4, merge it together and blend the data, what you're going to find is that you have a line chart, pardon me, that goes, pretty straightforward. And then all of a sudden it spikes for 2 years, right? And it's because everything in GA4, everything in GA3 is being looked at the same time, and that number is being doubled up. So what once was a single line of data is now two lines of data that is doubled up and looks like a big block, right? So what becomes the biggest challenge there is determining your source of truth. So what I typically recommend is if you create a channel and you're trying to create a summary channel that you can look at sessions, for example, across 10 years, and you want to use GA and GA4, you can do that. Again, it is important that you recognize the differences. And as an agency, if you are an agency, you have a responsibility to your client to recognize the actual difference in sessions year over year, and not just account for the artificial lift that you will get in GA4 sessions. Because how GA4 is counted, you are going to see a lift in sessions versus GA3. GA3 is going to show 10, GA4 is going to show 25, right? Because sessions are counted differently, it is something where you have to be mindful of that. So I would be very careful as to look at GA3 year over year, understand how your actual performance was. If you're looking at GA4, recognize, okay, actual performance indicators was a 10% difference, but GA4 is showing a 13% difference. So there's a 3% difference that's unaccounted for that GA4 is counting. That is something that GA4 is counting differently. It isn't that you were 3% better to marketer. That makes sense, right?
Yes.
It's our responsibility to recognize that and to recognize these data anomalies and not try to artificially take credit for data that you didn't necessarily do. So I think it's a responsibility we all have to kind of take on to ourselves. But if you're going to do this and you're going to look at sessions, you're going to blend this data, this is how you do it. So you come in to your channels, create a Google Analytics and Google Analytics 4 channel that combines the data. But then the biggest important thing here is data boundaries. Sometimes it's important to set boundaries. And in this situation, it definitely is. So what you want to do is look at your Google Analytics data and recognize, when do you want this to start? I can tell you most of my clients that I've worked with, I've been in this for 15 years. A lot of my clients go back 10 or 12 years. So looking at that, we want to make sure that we're looking at, the full date range that we want to be isolating and visualizing. And it very well maybe a situation where TapClicks hasn't ingested that data yet. And you need to talk to your customer support manager and talk to them about when you want to pull that historic look back, because it's very important that you communicate with your CSM so they can actually pull the data for you. Once you've pulled that look back, let's say to 2019, now you can set that as your starting point. Your end date is going to be whenever you decide that you want to start using GA4 as your source of truth. So I would say a best practice with this would be starting July 1st. Because that's when your data for GA4 started becoming more important. Google started opening up more of the data, the features that they were starting to release and all those different elements. So it's important to recognize your source of truth. So if GA4 stopped on July 1st, then you want to make sure June 31st, let's say, maybe it's June 30th, I don't remember exactly, is your end date for Google Analytics. And then your start date for GA4 is June 1st or July 1st, or whatever date you choose. And then your end date, you can just set from 10 years from now because it won't really matter. But what this does is it basically says, all right, Google Analytics GA3 is our source of truth until this date. And then GA4 is our source of truth from this date forward. And then as you look at a report looking at sessions, you're going to see a trend line that sees that scope and sees how it loads up. And actually, you know what? Now that I have this mapped, let's just do a test real quick. We have a minute or so left. I want to see what this trend line looks like, because I've actually not done on this example what this trend looks like here. So I'm kind of curious.
That's exciting.
So let's just take a quick look in real time. And this is some sample data, so I wonder if the sample data would even really give me much. I may have to try with an actual client here in a bit. So as a measure of example, you would not use the data category for Google Analytics, right? It's a channel. So you'd actually use the Google Analytics channel data, which you need to go all the way down here, find your Google Analytics channel, and use that data instead. As you're going to see, sessions is the only metric we actually have available to us. And then we're going to look at it by date. Let's populate that. And then from this standpoint, let's actually change our date range to look back at a good, I'd say probably last 13 months, if not more. So here's an example. This is obviously a demo account. So you're going to see, August 22, August 26, 2022, and what the data populates. So this is an example of the trend line that you could pull for sessions, understanding that peaks and valley. I think I'll probably actually go in and test to see what this looks like on a real profile, just to understand like the discrepancy and the difference between the two. What I would probably recommend, this is just kind of me waxing poetic, do one of these charts for your GA3 data, do one for GA4 data separately, both isolated for the same date range, because you're obviously going to know that you have data running at the same time for two different ranges, and then run a blended report so you can understand how that blended report changes when you have your dates in mind for your source of truth. And then I typically recommend having a sandbox so that you can run these tests and experiments without your clients, risking seeing these things that aren't necessarily meant for them. Run your guys' sandbox, save those templates. But I would recommend doing a line chart of your sessions for each platform, run it for the blended platform, and visually see what data you have in here, what the discrepancies are, because it's really important to know what you're talking about and that you're reporting the right information.
I love that tip to experiment, see how it works. Since it is not just a one-to-one match, seems like we all do need to do that experimentation to see the differences plotted out visually for us.
Yeah, you may be surprised. You may be surprised at what you're seeing. We did this for conversions, like I said, in our conversions for paid media, GA3 to GA4, our accredited conversion went up 30%.
Wow.
So it's worth doing the thought experiment.
Well, we have reached the end of our office hour. Thank you so
And our
much, everyone.
series.
And
This
our
is the last in our
series.
series. This is
It
so
is the
exciting.
last one. Brian, thank you for all of your time answering all of the questions that have come in throughout the course of this office hours series. And
It's been a pleasure.
for everyone else on the call, I hope you enjoy your day. If you have questions, anything that we've covered with the template, level 2 mappings, live calls, please feel free to connect with your customer success manager at TapClicks, and we can get you more answers as you have them.
Yep. And if you have questions for me, Brian Butler, I am at brian@smarttech.company. I'm here to help, and we can be of assistance.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much. Nice to see you, Angela. Talk soon.